well, the way the law is right now, every 2 years you have to recertify that you're an American citizen. Well, your citizenship doesn't change. So it's just kind of an unintended consequence and oversight of the law that was passed. So one aspect of this bill that I introduced says, once you establish your citizenship, you don't have to do that ever again with that agency. So if you're getting a nursing license or a business license and you go and you show that you're an American citizen, you don't have to jump through that hoop ever again. Another part of it is increasing our security in the state, which says if you have a foreign passport, that foreign passport cannot be used as to show that you are legally here in this country unless it has an immigration I-94A accompanying it. Now what the I-94A is basically, it's something that Immigration Service, ICE, gives you when you enter into this country, saying that they saw you with that passport when you entered into the country and they stamped it that you're here, and this form accompanies your passport saying it's issued at the border. The problem we have is in Atlanta, you can go to the Mexican consulate right there in Atlanta and just say, I want a passport, and they'll print you one right there. So people who have illegally entered into this nation can go right there to Atlanta Mexican consulate and get a passport. So it does that. The other thing it does is it simply clarifies what legislative intent was in 2006 when we passed Senate Bill 529 that states, as federal law already states, that post-secondary education is a public benefit. When we passed that in 2006, the university system took it upon themselves to redefine federal and state law as what a public benefit is. So they decided, well, public benefit only means that if the tuition is subsidized. So what they were doing is, there was a big fury about, in Kennesaw State, there was an illegal immigrant in Kennesaw State taking a seat there that other students couldn't get in. Well, the university system found out that student was also receiving tuition, in-state tuition, so the university system said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to use the E-Verify system, as the state said we had to verify the legality of these foreign students when they come to apply for classes. Well, what they were doing is only using that to determine whether they got in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition. So if they were illegally here, then the university was just charging them out-of-state tuition, which was 3 times as much, and still allowing them into colleges. Well, this came to a head when there were veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan trying to get into some of our colleges and were not able to get in because classes were filled. And as it turns out, there were some illegals that were filling those classes. All that portion of the bill does is clarify what our legislative intent was, of saying post-secondary education is a public funded benefit. This is simply protecting taxpayer funds. The illegal immigrants, now it doesn't affect any of the private colleges. If someone is here illegally, they can still go to any of our 25 private universities and colleges. It's simply the university system and our technical colleges. They would not be allowed to be enrolled in those classes because it is a public funded benefit. And all this does is bring us in line with what's already federal law. Now, the status is that bill is over in the House right now, and the effect would be of this is the over 300 illegal students, illegal aliens that are currently enrolled in the university system of Georgia would not be able to complete. I mean, they would be taken off the rolls and new students would not be enrolled. Now, this was asked of me several times, well, what's wrong with allowing these students to go to college so they can get a degree and become a productive member of our society? How many employers do we have in here? How many people have actually applied for a job in here? What's a form that you have to fill out when you go get an employment? An I-9. You cannot get a job in this country if you are here illegally. So when they're graduating with a doctor or a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate degree, they cannot legally obtain employment in this country, so they're leaving the country. So simply, it's the effect. That's the effect it's going to have. Now, what's interesting is my wife called me right after that bill started hitting the press, and she said, you would be amazed how many emails you're getting in support of this, and many of those are coming from public school teachers. And the public school teachers are saying, I like your bill, can you extend it to us? Well, the answer is no. The federal government will not allow it through the Supreme Court decision that we have. an obligation. If they're here, we have to educate them.
One more thing, let's change the
Yes.
subject. In your search for cutting funds at the state level, did you guys cut anything out of EPA or EPD?
All the agencies have been significantly reduced. I've got some legislation right now, and I saw a piece of legislation that would make some significant changes in the EPD in the state level. If you give me your contact information, I know I just was sat in on a meeting where there's some significant changes to EPD coming, but I've been meeting with them about loosening some of the regulatory restrictions that we have. But yeah, every department has been cut. And if you look at the cuts that have happened, one thing to consider, education is 60% of our state budget. When you look at all the state budget, 60% of that, an overwhelming majority is K through 12 education. So when the budget goes down, of course, when you've got a piece of that pie that is 60%, you can't help but cut that. But I believe in the first 2 years, we only cut 3%. If I remember, I haven't seen the numbers from this year, but it was about between 3 and 6% was only cut from education. Whereas there were certain departments, we cut 85% out of the budget of those departments. And EPD was one of those that was in the mid-range as far as the cuts. There's one of the departments that really has to be reined in, but they also have an important role to conduct. But we have to find that balance in there. And I think Governor Deal's doing a good job with his appointees into these departments. Yes, ma'am.
I have one quick question about education. I'm sorry. It's what I do. It's my life. So.
That's an important.
There is a bill, I believe, in the Senate requiring that every high school kid in the state complete an online course. And I'm wondering, if this passes, who's buying the technology? Because I know what we've got in our building as far as computers go, and I'm thinking this is going to cost quite a bit of money, and I'm wondering how we can pay for it.
Well, that's a good question, and I remember the bill that came before us in the Senate, and some of that was brought up, and I need to go back and talk to the bill's author, who I know very well. I believe what his intent was is that class didn't necessarily have to be taken at school, but it could even be taken from home. And I'll go back and I'll talk to him about that, because one of the things that they're promoting is we do need to adopt more technology. And I'm not saying that I'm supporting that mandate, okay? But one of the things that they're doing is one of the things about Georgia Virtual School that I find very appealing. You may not know this, but if you take a French class with Georgia Virtual School, the instructor is in Paris. If you take a Japanese language class in Georgia Virtual School, that instructor is in Japan. And so the technology that we have is phenomenal. And I think that bill is probably just a catalyst. It's probably more of a talking point. You'll see sometimes the legislature does legislation to bring an issue up. I don't do those type of things to introduce legislation to just create a talking point. I think we do that, as y'all have proven. That's a very good question. Yes, ma'am.
In the transportation department, is there any new developments, updates on the 140 projects, the land acquisition? Is it still pretty much on target?
You know, the last I checked, it is. I will get an update. If you give me your card, I will check with the Department of Transportation. You know, they run at a snail's pace because it's heavily federal mandated. I'm glad you asked that, because I assumed you were going to ask about 411 connector, because that's all everybody asks about. But we are at Adairsville, and unless Representative Coomer has any additional knowledge, last I heard they're still on track.
That's the same thing I heard from Jeff Lewis, our DOT worker, told me.
Well, I know in the beginning they came out and it was really fast paced and then nothing, no word.
Well, a lot of the funding is dried up, and so the Department of Transportation, because we have to match. One thing, the feds can just print money. We can't do that, and so we have to match it with the money they just print. Now, not directly dealing with transportation. Let me tell you something I found out yesterday, and this has floored me. One of the members of the Senate leadership sat down with me. He's in the agricultural business. He said